The attacker, Rahami, born in Afghanistan in 88. His father is an entrepreneur in New Jersey with a chicken store. The questions here, in addition to how he built the bombs and why and all the matters that are going to come as law enforcement goes forward, the question that sticks up is Afghanistan. The news reports tonight say that Rahami made a trip or more than one trip to Afghanistan. What do we know about those trips? Good evening to you, Bill.
Good evening, John and Eli. We know next to nothing about these trips. I've heard one trip. I've heard multiple trips over the last several years, and really that's all we have. If he was traveling to Afghanistan, I think that does increase the likelihood that he may have engaged with jihadists of some stripe, be the Afghan Taliban, Al-Qaeda, the Pakistan movement of Taliban in Pakistan, possibly the Islamic State or other groups. We don't know. It's just too soon to know. I imagine authorities are going to be able to tease out, and it'll probably get leaked in short order on how many trips he took and exactly when he took them.
All right, quickly, Bill, what do you pick up on what we know so far about his attack? How do you characterize this attack?
At the very least, it appears it seems to be a well-planned and somewhat poorly executed attack. He picked multiple locations. He was able to deploy bombs in multiple locations. Some went off, some didn't, some were found. In the case in Chelsea, one of the bombs didn't detonate. The other one was put under a garbage container, which may have contained some of the blast. But, one thing does seem clear. He does appear, based on the information we have, again, first 24 hours on this, but the information that we have indicates that he very likely went online, looked at jihadist propaganda to learn how to build bombs.
Right. Eli, you have a question for Bill.
Well, I was going to say, we saw that the Senate Intelligence Committee Chairman Richard Burr, who's up for his own re-election right now, went on Fox News and said there was a lot of pre-planning, but it seems that, if anything, this was haphazard.
If there was a lot of pre-planning, I would have worn a hoodie if I'm on the streets of New York.
Yeah, you wouldn't have gone to Chelsea. I wouldn't have done it. I would have. And the locations, we're still getting information coming in, seem random. And in some ways, this harkens back to the kind of radical terror of the early 70s that New York faced when, the biggest threat was, the Weather Underground and the FLN and other groups like that.
Well, I look at the targeting, for one, and you had a Marine Corps a charity associated with the Marine Corps, a run. This reminds us quite a bit like
Boston Marathon, of course.
Boston Marathon. You have a train station, transportation hub, and then an upscale neighborhood in New York, and I don't, not knowing the neighborhood, but I suspect there may be something there that wanted to target. So the targeting, to me, seems to be quite in line with the way jihadists pick their targets. Again, you have to separate the planning and the execution out in this. To me, it seems, you had multiple attacks that could have gone off over the course of 24 hours in multiple locations. Just the execution of it probably a little sloppy. I completely agree. I've been saying all day. Why doesn't this guy know there's surveillance cameras around?
Yeah.
Either he wanted his face out there, or he didn't know any better, or he just didn't care.
And the shootout today leaves lots of questions about what the planning was, whether he had accomplices. We'll park that, saying it's early. The investigation is ongoing. Tom Jocelyn joins us because over these last days there was another attack. This one quite different in that we recognize it as stabbings, as slashing, something that we've seen a lot in Israel over these last months. Tom, a very good evening to you. What do we know about the slash or the stabbings in Minnesota?
Well, good evening, John and Eli. In Minnesota, we had a little bit of a different scenario here where we have a specific claim of responsibility by a mock news agency, which is the principal propaganda arm for the Islamic State. And I would say on average, if you went through all their claims, and we have, on average, there's something to the Islamic State's claims, particularly with their attacks in the West, more often than not. More often than not, there's some sort of either digital tie or bricks and mortar tie back to the mothership. Those details remain to be filled in here, however. We don't really know for sure yet exactly how this all came about or if there's something more to the story. But this attack in the mall in Minnesota by a young Somali American was basically consistent with what the Islamic State's been calling for, which is basically pick up a machete, pick up a knife, drive your car, do whatever you can to go out and kill people. They've sort of taken the old model of individual attacks that was advocated by Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and Al-Qaeda, and they've sort of lowered the bar for what they consider a successful attack by an individual attacker in that regard. So this is something consistent with what we've seen in Europe, for example, where if you think back to in Germany, where you had a teenager who went on a train with a machete and just started hacking away, or some of the other small-scale attacks there, like in Normandy, where a pair of terrorists went into a church and beheaded a priest. This is the type of thing now that the Islamic State is advocating for, very crude, operations that don't really require any operational planning or sophistication, and they're at least claiming responsibility for this one in Minnesota. We still have a lot of details to fill in there as well, though.
Any sign of a video beforehand? That has been something of a pattern.
Yeah, that has been something of a pattern. In 4 cases since June, there have been where there's been a terrorist attack, either 2 in Germany, 1 in France, and 1 in Moscow, where actually the claim was first put out by a mock news agency. There was a written claim, and then they followed up in short order with a video of the terrorist responsible swearing allegiance to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. This is part of the script. So far, there's no video like that out of Minnesota.
Eli?
What do you make of the kind of reflexive line that we hear a lot from the administration now, that these attacks are evidence that the Islamic State is losing territory and it's losing its broader war?
Well, I do think it's a little bit tone deaf. I mean, it's certainly the case that the Islamic State is losing ground in Iraq and Syria. They've lost quite a bit of ground, absolutely, and they definitely are. Their caliphate claim is becoming more and more tenuous by the day. So that's a certainty. But the problem is twofold. One, they'll continue on as a prolific insurgency even without having a lot of territory under their control. They'll probably still have some territory under control, and the territory outside of that, they'll be able to wage a prolific insurgency using their martyrdom bombers and everything else. We've seen this year, for example, the Islamic State has claimed more suicide attacks per month on average than all terrorist groups combined in any month in previous history. So basically they're executing martyrdom operations or suicide attacks at an unprecedented rate, really, in Iraq, Syria, and Libya. So at the same time they're losing ground there, they're still able to wage this prolific insurgency. But the second thing is that this external operations arm of the Islamic State is proving that they're, as I said earlier, they're lowering the bar for what they consider a successful attack, either inspired or directed by the external operations arm, and they're showing that they're able to reach out into multiple different countries at this point. So it's still a major threat worldwide, even as they're losing ground.
Tom Jocelyn and Bill Roggio of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. They keep the Long War Journal with their colleagues. Eli Lake of the Bloomberg View, he's a columnist. An attack by an unknown linked New Jersey resident associated with Afghanistan, and an attack in Minnesota by an American citizen, a link to Somalia, linked to the Islamic State. When we come back, Al-Qaeda's in the field. I'm John Batchelor.